My neighbor of 22 years knocked on my car window while I was still sitting in the driveway, and the look on her face made me turn off the engine. I had just come back from dropping my daughter and her husband at the airport. They were flying to Cancun for what they called a belated anniversary trip, and I had driven them myself, because that is the kind of father I am. I carried their bags to the curb. I hugged my daughter. I shook my son-in-law's hand. I watched them disappear through the sliding doors, and then I sat in the cell phone lot for 20 minutes because I did not want to go home to a quiet house. My neighbor, Evelyn, is 71 years old, and she's lived next door since before my wife passed. She brought us casseroles after the funeral. She waters my tomatoes when I travel. She is not a dramatic woman. She does not exaggerate. So when she knocked on my window and her face looked like that, I did not roll it down halfway. I rolled it all the way down. She said, "Theodore, I need you to look at something before you go inside." I asked her what she meant. She held up her phone. She had been sitting on her porch that afternoon, she said, and she noticed my daughter's car still in my driveway even though I had driven them to the airport 2 hours earlier. She thought maybe they had taken an Uber and forgotten something. She saw my son-in-law go back inside using the spare key they kept for emergencies. She did not think much of it at first, but then she watched him carry 2 boxes out to the car, and then 2 more. And then she saw my daughter come around from the side gate with a trash bag that was not trash. Evelyn had recorded it on her phone. 11 minutes of shaky video from her porch swing zoomed in through the magnolia branches. I watched it sitting in my own driveway with the engine off and the afternoon sun baking through the windshield. I watched my son-in-law load my late wife's china into the back seat of their car. I watched my daughter carry out the wooden box I kept on the shelf above my desk, the one with the coin collection my father left me, the one my grandson was supposed to inherit one day. I watched them work quickly, the way people work when they know they have a limited window. I thanked Evelyn. I told her to go inside and stay there. Then I sat alone in that car for a long time. Here is what you need to understand about my son-in-law. His name is Preston, and he has a voice like a news anchor and a handshake like a politician. And for 9 years I told myself that my discomfort around him was just a father's instinct, just that irrational thing men feel when someone takes their daughter away. I told myself I was being unfair. I invited him to Thanksgiving. I lent him money twice without asking for it back. I put his name on the short-term emergency contact form at my cardiologist's office because my daughter asked me to, and I trusted her. I had been having heart problems for 8 months. Mild arrhythmia, my doctor said. Manageable. I was on a beta blocker, and I was supposed to avoid stress. Preston had started coming over on Sunday afternoons about 6 months ago. Very attentive, very concerned. He brought me decaf coffee from the good place downtown. He asked about my medications. He sat in my kitchen and listened to me talk, which I appreciated because since my wife died, I do not have many people who sit still long enough to listen. He had been managing my grocery delivery for 3 months. He said it was easier, said he could make sure I was eating right with my heart condition. I let him because it was kind, or I thought it was kind, and because I was tired and lonely and 67 years old. And sometimes kindness looks exactly like its opposite until you are sitting in a hot car watching 11 minutes of video on your neighbor's phone. I did not go inside. I drove to my doctor's office instead. Not my cardiologist, my internist, a man named Dr. Alvarado who has known me for 15 years and who does not mince words. I told him what I had been feeling the past several months. The fatigue beyond what the beta blocker should cause, the occasional confusion that I had been attributing to grief. The way food had started tasting metallic sometimes, which I mentioned once to my daughter, and she said it was probably just acid reflux. Dr. Alvarado ordered a full panel on the spot. He drew the blood himself. While I waited, I drove to a hardware store and bought a small digital recorder, the kind reporters used to carry before everything went to phones. Then I drove back to Dr. Alvarado's office and sat in the waiting room with a magazine I did not read. He called me back in 40 minutes later, and he did not sit behind his desk. He sat in the chair next to me, which is what doctors do when the news requires it. He said my potassium levels were severely elevated. He said there were traces of something in my blood work, that he wanted to send to a specialist, but that his preliminary read suggested a substance consistent with digoxin, a heart medication that can be lethal in the wrong dose for someone with my condition. He asked me if I had been prescribed digoxin. I had not. He asked me if I had access to anyone who did. I thought about Preston's mother, who had congestive heart failure and lived 40 minutes away. Dr. Alvarado told me I needed to go to the hospital. I told him to give me 48 hours. He looked at me the way doctors look at patients who are about to do something inadvisable. But I was not asking. I told him I needed to know how much I was dealing with first, and I needed the people responsible to not know that I knew. He gave me something to help stabilize my levels in the short term and made me promise to come back the next morning. I kept that promise. I checked into a motel off Route 9 that night, not because I was afraid to be in my own house, but because I needed to think without being watched, and because if Preston and my daughter were monitoring my patterns, a quiet night at home would tell them nothing had changed. I needed them comfortable. Comfortable people keep moving. I called my attorney from the motel room. His name is Graham, and he has handled my affairs for 11 years. I told him everything. He did not say much while I talked. When I finished, he said, "Fyodor, I need you to let me make 2 calls tonight." I told him to make them. I lay on the motel bed with my phone at my chest, and I thought about my daughter when she was small. She used to climb into my lap while I watched the evening news and fall asleep there, just completely trusting the full weight of her against me. I thought about teaching her to drive in the church parking lot on Saturday mornings. I thought about the way she cried at her wedding, happy crying, and how I cried too in the car afterward, because I was proud and also because her mother was not there to see it. And then I thought about the grocery deliveries. 6 months of groceries that Preston selected and paid for with my credit card, which I had given him access to and which I had never once audited. 6 months of decaf coffee from the good place downtown. I did not sleep. The next morning, I met Graham at his office before it opened. He had made his 2 calls. The first was to a forensic accountant named Mr. Delgado, who had done work for his firm before. The second was to a contact at the county sheriff's office, a detective who handled financial crimes and elder abuse cases. Graham said that last part carefully. Elder abuse, like he was checking to see how I would take it. I took it fine. I was past the point of being sensitive about the category I had fallen into. We spent 3 hours going through my accounts. In the past 6 months, Preston had made 17 purchases on my credit card beyond the groceries. Most were small enough not to trip any alerts. A hardware store in a town I had never been to, a storage facility rental 40 miles away, a payment to a notary service I did not recognize, and one charge, 4 months ago, to an online pharmacy based out of Florida that Mr. Delgado flagged immediately. My daughter had power of attorney over my healthcare decisions. I had signed it 2 years ago after my first cardiac episode, because she was my only family and it seemed like the responsible thing to do. Preston had drafted the document. He was not a lawyer, but he had presented it as something standard that his uncle, who was a lawyer, had prepared. I had signed it without having Graham review it. That was my mistake, and I have had to sit with that. The document, as it turned out, was not standard. It gave her authority not just over medical decisions, but over asset management in the event I was deemed incapacitated. Incapacity was defined broadly. It could be triggered by a single physician's assessment, and Preston had been taking me to his preferred physician for my last 3 checkups. A man I had never met before this year. Here is the part that still makes my chest tight when I think about it. 3 weeks before this all came apart, my daughter had sat with me at my kitchen table and gently suggested that maybe it was time to think about assisted living. She said it with such softness, such apparent concern. She said the memory things worried her. She said I had left the stove on twice, which I had not. She said Preston had noticed I seemed confused sometimes on the phone. She asked if I would be open to an evaluation. I told her I was fine. She looked at me with that expression, the one that mixed love with pity, and said she just wanted to make sure I was taken care of. I had believed her. The storage facility 40 miles away was registered in Preston's name but was paid on my card. Graham sent someone to check on it. It held furniture, my furniture, a dining table. My wife and I bought an estate sale in Vermont the year we got married. The cedar chest from our bedroom, Boxes I could not yet inventory. They had been moving things out slowly for months, staging a removal so gradual I would not notice until there was nothing left. I want to be honest about what I felt when Graham laid all of this out in front of me on that conference table. I did not feel rage, not yet. I felt something quieter and more corrosive. I felt stupid. 67 years old, I had survived a recession, a hostile partner buyout, my wife's cancer, 3 years of grief, and I had been slow-walked into a corner by a man who brought me good coffee on Sundays. But stupid is not the same as finished. I spent the rest of that day with Graham and Mr. Delgado building the reversal. We were not going to call the police yet. Not because I was protecting my daughter, but because a premature call would give Preston time to move assets, destroy records, and construct a narrative about a confused elderly father who had imagined everything. I needed them to keep going. I needed them to commit fully, so completely that there was no exit. The power of attorney document could be challenged on the grounds that it had been obtained through misrepresentation. Graham was already drafting the petition. But first I needed to neutralize the storage unit before they moved those items further. Graham arranged for a court order that would freeze the contents pending investigation. That bought us time. Then I went home. I walked through the front door at 4 in the afternoon and nothing had changed, which was the point. The shelf above my desk still had the impression in the dust where the coin box had been, but I did not look at it. I made dinner. I watched television. I went to bed. My daughter called me the next morning from Cancun, her voice bright and easy, and asked how I was feeling. I told her I was a little tired, but good. I told her the house was quiet. She said she was glad I was resting. She asked if I had remembered to take my medication. I told her I had. She said Preston sent his regards. I said to tell him thank you. I had started recording all my calls 3 days earlier. When they came home 4 days later, they came straight to my house, which they always did, and my daughter hugged me and Preston carried in a small gift from Mexico, a hand-painted bowl, and set it on my kitchen counter like an offering. They were both relaxed. That is the word for it. They had been on a vacation with money they believed was already theirs, and they had come back to tie off the last detail. The last detail was me. 2 days after they returned, Preston called and said he had made an appointment with a geriatric specialist for the following Friday. He said he had talked to my cardiologist's office and they had forwarded my records. He said this was just to get a baseline, just precautionary, and he said it the way he said everything, smoothly, reasonably, as if the idea had originated from concern rather than calculation. I said that sounded fine. I called Graham as soon as I hung up. The specialist Preston had chosen was a man who had surrendered his medical license in another state and was operating here on a provisional basis following a reinstated appeal. He had 2 prior complaints filed against him with the state board, one involving an elderly patient whose family had disputed a capacity assessment. Graham's contact at the sheriff's office had already flagged him. I kept the appointment. I sat in that office on Friday morning and I answered every question clearly, every cognitive test, every memory exercise, every orientation check. The doctor was careful, but I could feel the angle he was working, the leading questions, the way he noted my pauses. After 45 minutes, he said he wanted to do a follow-up, and that in the meantime I should have a family member present for major decisions. He looked at his paperwork when he said it. He did not look at me. I thanked him and left. In the parking lot, I sat in my car, and I allowed myself 2 minutes of something close to grief, because the version of my daughter I had raised would never have done this, and I had to keep making room for the distance between who she had been and who she had become. After 2 minutes, I started the engine, and I drove to Graham's office, where the detective was already waiting. We spent 3 hours that afternoon going through everything: the blood work, the receipts, the storage unit inventory, the power of attorney document, the recorded calls, the video Evelyn had taken from her porch. The detective said it was one of the cleaner financial elder abuse cases he had seen in terms of documentation. He said the digoxin in the blood work changed the character of the charge substantially. I asked him what substantially meant. He said it meant we were no longer talking about fraud. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning. I was not there for it, which was my choice. Graham had advised me I could be present, and I said no. Not because I could not bear it, but because I did not want my last image of my daughter to be that one. I wanted to keep the one I already had, the one from the church parking lot on Saturday mornings. Her hands at 10 and 2, her tongue pressed between her teeth in concentration while she navigated a gentle left turn. I heard about it from Graham afterward. They came to the house my daughter and Preston shared, early, before 7. Preston did not resist. My daughter cried and asked to call me, and they let her make one call, and I did not answer because I could not yet, not that morning. The charges were elder financial abuse, fraud, criminal administration of a controlled substance, and conspiracy. The digoxin charge carried the most weight. Graham said the prosecutor was treating it as attempted poisoning, which under the statute meant the sentencing guidelines were considerably longer than a fraud case alone. Preston's mother's physician had confirmed that Preston had been refilling her digoxin prescription at a pharmacy 2 towns over from where she lived for the past 8 months, using her insurance in quantities beyond her prescribed dose. The excess had to go somewhere. The fake capacity evaluation doctor lost his provisional license within 2 weeks. The state board moved faster than I expected, which surprised me, though Graham said these things accelerate when there is criminal context. The storage facility contents were returned to my house over 2 days in November. The moving company Graham hired stacked everything in the garage because I could not look at it all at once. The dining table, the cedar chest, my wife's things that I had not yet been ready to sort through, but that I had wanted to sort through on my own terms, in my own time. I moved the dining table back into the dining room myself. It took me a while and I had to rest twice, but I did it. I changed the locks. I canceled the grocery delivery account. I called my cardiologist's office and had Preston's name removed from every document. I sat with a different attorney and had a proper reviewed power of attorney drawn up naming Graham in the interim, with clear and narrow conditions. And then I called Evelyn and asked if she wanted to come over for dinner. She brought a pie. I made chicken, nothing fancy, and we ate at the table my wife and I had bought at that estate sale in Vermont. And Evelyn talked about her grandchildren, and I talked about nothing in particular, and it was the most normal evening I had spent in longer than I could remember. At some point, she said she was sorry it had come to all of this, and I told her that the only reason any of it had come out at all was because of her, because she had been paying attention when I was not paying attention to myself. She waved that off the way she waves everything off. She said she had just been sitting on her porch. I know people will ask about my daughter, and I will tell you what I know, which is not much. Her attorney has indicated she may pursue a reduced plea in exchange for full cooperation. I do not know what that means yet in terms of years or terms. I do not know if I will speak to her before the trial. I have thought about writing her a letter, and I have started it twice and stopped both times, not because I do not have things to say, but because I do not yet know which things are worth saying and which things are just noise, from a man who was still processing the distance between who his daughter was and who she decided to become. What I do know is this. I am still here. My levels are normal now, 3 months of treatment and monitoring, and they are back to where they should be for a man my age with my history. My heart is still imperfect, but it is mine, and it is still going. And some mornings it feels like enough, and some mornings it feels like more than enough. I planted tomatoes again this spring. Evelyn's are doing better than mine, which is the natural order of things. I let my grandson come over on Saturdays sometimes, my son's boy, and we watch old baseball games, and I teach him how to keep a scorecard the way my father taught me, and when he gets something right I tell him so, and when he gets something wrong I tell him that too, because that is what you do for people you are actually trying to help. If you are listening to this and you have an older parent, a grandparent, a neighbor who lives alone, I want you to think about what it means to pay attention, not to manage, not to optimize, just to notice. Evelyn was sitting on her porch, the same thing she has done every afternoon for 20 years. And that ordinary habit saved my life. I do not say that dramatically. I say it because it is accurate. The people in your life who need the most protection are often the ones least likely to ask for it, because they spent their whole lives being the ones who protected everyone else, and that habit is very hard to break. I know, because I am one of them. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment and let me know where you are watching from. And if you have ever had to reckon with betrayal from someone you trusted completely, tell me about it. I read every single one. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that loyalty is something you choose, not something you are born into. Until next time, take care of yourselves and keep an eye on your neighbors. The thing I keep coming back to is the coffee. 6 months of Sunday afternoons, Preston sitting across from me at my own kitchen table, handing me a cup from the good place downtown, asking about my medications with that measured, practiced concern. I thanked him every time. I believed it was kindness, because I wanted it to be kindness, because I was lonely and tired, and the alternative was too ugly to hold in my mind for long. That is what I have had to reckon with more than anything else. Not the betrayal itself, but the way I cooperated with it. I signed documents without having Graham review them. I handed over my grocery account. I let Preston select my physician for 3 consecutive checkups. Every one of those decisions made a certain kind of sense at the time, and every one of them was a door I opened myself. I do not say that to punish myself. I say it because understanding how it happened is the only way I know how to make sure it does not happen again, and the only honest thing I can offer to anyone listening. There is a version of this story where I am simply a victim, where Preston and my daughter are monsters and I am blameless. That version is easier, and it is also incomplete. The fuller version is that I had built a life around trusting the people closest to me, which is not a character flaw, but I had stopped asking the basic questions that trust should never fully replace. I stopped reading what I signed. I stopped noticing what I spent. I told myself that was what family was for. And I was wrong, not about family, but about what family actually requires of you. Real care does not ask you to stop paying attention to your own life. Real care helps you pay closer attention to it. What saved me was not cleverness. Evelyn was not clever that afternoon. She was just present. She was sitting where she always sits, doing what she always does, and she noticed because she was looking. That is the thing I want people to hear. You do not need a sophisticated plan to protect someone you love. You need to show up consistently enough that you notice when something is off. Evelyn had 22 years of ordinary afternoons to draw from, and that accumulation of ordinary is what made the wrong thing visible. I think about the 3 months of treatment to clear the digoxin from my system. My cardiologist said the damage was not permanent, that the heart is more resilient than we give it credit for. I held on to that, because there is a kind of damage that is not permanent if you catch it, and there is a kind of strength that does not announce itself in the good years. It shows up in the hard ones, in the decision to sit across from Mr. Delgado and go through every line of every receipt, in the decision to keep the Friday appointment with that doctor and answer every question clearly and walk out with your dignity intact, in the decision to plant tomatoes again in the spring, even though the previous season felt like it took something from you that you were not sure you could replace. I lost my daughter, or the version of her I thought I knew. That is a grief I'm still carrying and probably will be for a long time. But I did not lose myself. And on the mornings when that feels like a small consolation, I sit at the dining table my wife and I bought at that estate sale in Vermont, and I think about the Saturday mornings in the church parking lot, her hands at 10 and 2, and I remind myself that I was a good father. Whatever she became, I was a good father. That part belongs to me, and it always will.